put on this computer. All right, and more make host. It's all yours.
Thank you, Victor. Okay, so once more, good evening, everybody. Thank you for your patience, and welcome to what is what will be the last of our series at the look at the duties and responsibilities of French infantry NCOs. So we're all the way at the top. We start off with the corporal, we had a look at the sergeant, and now we're all the way at the top and we're mixing two together. We've got the Sgt Major and the Caporal Fourier, so the Sergeant Major and the Quartermaster Corporal, I suppose we could call him in this instance to make it simple. Once more, thanks to Victor again for organizing the everything this evening. We got there in the end, that's the main thing, and now we're well underway, hopefully. So without further ado, let's take a look at what
before you start, I would ask everyone mute their mics. If you have a question or something, you can always either wait for Mark to ask for questions or send a chat on the side. But if we're all muted, that way there won't be interference and we'll hear much better.
Perfect. Thanks a lot. Okay, so what are we looking at today? First of all, we're going to be looking at the function and the roles for both of these men. We'll briefly, and I mean very briefly, look at their place in the line of battle. And then afterwards, we'll get into the crux of what we came here tonight, which is to find out what they do on a daily basis and every other week or every other time when they are asked to do something.
Silence?
Yeah.
So this is a proposed Wild West scenario.
There we go. Sorry for that. I'm just deactivating the sound for you, Jim. And we'll be looking also at the particular duties that they can be called upon to be done. And lastly, as it's becoming almost a tradition in these little NCO presentations, we will also be looking at how to punish a Sergeant Major or a Caporal Fourier if necessary. Let's take a look at the Sergeant Major first. Okay, so you first see the mentioned Sergeant Major in from 1766. However, that does not mean that he was non-existent up to that point. He did exist 20 years prior to that, but he just appears under the word Fourier. So from 1766 onwards, they've actually given him a higher title of Sergeant Major as opposed to just Quartermaster. As mentioned, he is the highest NCO of his company, and he commands all other NCOs regarding the duties and running of the company. He is the boss, basically, who sees the day-to-day management of the company, whereas the officers just basically just say what they would like to see or what has to be done, and he makes sure it gets done. He looks into the details. And he's also in charge of the administration books for his company. We will be looking at that, but not in great detail because it does actually get quite intense. But it could be a subject for another one of our conferences. He is also responsible for any sick man or any man who goes off on leave. As he leaves, he hands over all his equipment and kit to the Sergeant Major, and the Sergeant Major, he keeps it in his lodgings up until the man comes back either from a hospital or from his leave. Speaking of lodgings, the Sergeant Major in garrison, he sleeps alone. He has his own room. However, he can share the lodgings with the Caporal Fourier if necessary for practical reasons, since the two men will be working together very closely throughout the military day. Should he be absent for any reason, the Sergeant Major is automatically replaced by the most senior of the company's sergeants. And just in essence, to sum up what a Sergeant Major is, he's responsible to the company's captain for all details relating to the service, the discipline of the men, and the company's administration. So that's why he's the highest NCO. If we look at the Caporal Fourier, he gets re-established in 1758 under the title of Sergeant Fourier. He's not a corporal at this point. He has the rank of a sergeant, and he's considered above the sergeants at this point, but below the Fourier. From 1776 onwards, the rank is renamed to Caporal Fourier, corporal quartermaster. and now he's positioned underneath the Sergeant Major, so the new Sergeant Major title, but he is still above all the sergeants. He's the highest of the company's corporal, but he gets a sergeant's pay. So he's higher up in terms of function. His function is more important, less per se, than that of the sergeants. In terms of rank, he's not as high as them, but he gets the pay just to cover it up. So he gets a sergeant's pay, but he doesn't get the sergeant's stripe. And he's under the immediate orders of the Sergeant Major, of which he shares the lodgings, as we mentioned earlier. And contrary to the Sergeant Major, Fourier has absolutely no right of signature. The people who have right of signature in the administration of a company are, of course, the officers, the Sergeant Major, but not the Fourier. The Fourier fills paper, does paperwork, but any paperwork he does which requires a signature, he cannot sign off for it. He has to get somebody else to sign off for it. And he's in charge also of basically supplying all the writings and reports that the Sergeant Major doesn't want to do. In essence, the Sergeant Major can delegate part or all his administration onto the Fourier, plus the Fourier has his own administration to do. However, if the Fourier doesn't do his job correctly and the Sergeant Major doesn't control the Fourier's work before handing it over to the officer, it will be, of course, the Sergeant Major who will have problems for not checking up the work before handing it over. So in essence, he's the secretary. He's the secretary of the company, but he's not the administrator. And last but not least, if the Caporal Fourier is absent for any reason, it's the Sergeant Major who replaces him. We don't get another corporal or the most senior corporal left to do this job. It's the Sergeant Major that does everything at that point onwards. If we have a look at their place in the line of battle, the 1791 regulations is very clear regarding the Sergeant Major. The Sergeant Major is behind the right of the second section of his company in the supernumerary rank, or his platoon rather than company, since we're talking about maneuvers. The color guard of each battalion is comprised of Fourier, Caporal Fourier, as I will see, but the man who carries the color is a Sergeant Major, up until the decree of 18th of February 1808, when that role is taken away from him and the colors or the eagle will now be carried by an officer. So the Sergeant Major just goes at the back of his company in the supernumerary rank. And if we have a look at the Caporal Fourier, as the image shows, this is obviously a color guard after the decree in 1808. So you've got the officer bearing the flag, the color no longer the Sergeant Major, but he's surrounded by Corporal Fouriers. And the color guard is comprised of the 8 Caporal Fouriers that come from the Fusilier companies. This is, of course, when the battalions were 9 companies strong, with 1 company of grenadiers and 8 of Fusiliers. It changed somewhat in 1808 when battalions were moved up into a 6-company setup. But in essence, the Caporal Fouriers provide the guard around the color for each battalion. As I said, this was going to be very quick, so now let's get into the crux of the subject. Let's have a look at the Sergeant Major first of all. What's his daily duties? Okay, so each morning, the Sergeant Major has to check the roll calls carried out by the corporals of his squads. So he does not have to be physically present at morning roll call. But the corporals, once they've done their escouade's roll call, they bring the results to his attention in his lodgings probably. And then he cross-examines that with the roll call of the previous night and updates the escouade sheets and the daily report as necessary. That's the point when he finds out if there are any sick men, and if there are any sick men, he has to draw up a note which he takes to the guardhouse later on for the attention of the Sgt Major, and making sure to indicate the name of the sick man and his room number. Later on in the morning, once that's done, the Sgt Major goes to the guard post and he picks up all these tickets, all these notes, and then goes and visits each sick man to make sure that they are sick, and if they are sick, if they need to go to hospital or if they just need a bit of rest. At 9:30 in the morning, he hands over the rapport to the adjudant de semaine. So the rapport, it's literally, it's the French word report. It's the report of the last 24 hours. Every 24 hours, the sergeant major with the Fourier do what's called the rapport de journalier, the daily report. It just basically tells the officers what's happened in the last 24 hours. If we've got sick men, how many men do we have left under arms? If there's any men that have come back from leave or sick, how many men have we got now? Any feats or anything that's worthy of being brought to the attention of the company's officers or the battalion's officers, for that matter, if it's quite serious, from the guardhouse. And the adjudant de semaine, that's basically, the battalion has two adjudants sous-officiers and one adjutant major. And between them, one of them will be de semaine. He'll be the weekly duty adjutant. And he picks up all these reports from all the different companies within the battalions and then takes them up to battalion level HQ to sort out, have a look, so that they know how many men they have under arms at that particular point. Likewise, he also draws different postes et rondes. So ronde basically is an officer. Normally, he does a round around the sentinels to make sure that the sentries are not sleeping, that they're doing their work correctly. That's called a ronde. And the poste basically is not the guard house, but it's a guard position. So it's a smaller post. Maybe it's a corporal with a few men. Maybe it's a sergeant with a couple of corporals and let's say 20, 30, maybe even 40 men. So it's different guard posts around the positions. So he draws lots. And depending on what he draws, that's who we know, what officer, what sergeant, what corporal, what men are going to take part in these different posts for the next 24 hours, and which officers have got the responsibility of doing the rounds around the sentries that particular day. Once that's done, he'll be given what's called the marron. So the French word marron is the color brown, but it's also the chestnut. But it's not actual chestnuts he gets. It's basically a flat disc, a flat wooden disc with a number on it. And he hands that out to the officers that are going to be doing these rondes. Basically, for example, let's imagine the battalion commander decides that there will be 4 rondes that day. So that means there will be 4 marrons. In each of the marrons, there'll be 1, 2, 3, or 4. And the battalion commander will decide that, for example, ronde number 1 will be at 7 a.m., ronde number 2 will be at 10 a.m., and so on and so forth. And as you do the ronde, as you're going around the circuit that you're expected to do at certain strategic points, there is a tin box that you put this little marron in, and then you sign off on a sheet of paper that's also left there. And by the end of the day, the tin boxes are collected with the sheets of paper, and simply by emptying the box, we can see if the ronde has indeed gone past that particular post or not. So it's a way of checking to make sure no one's taking shortcuts and they are going where they're supposed to be going. So that's the sergeant major that draws that and distributes it out to the men that need to know. Likewise, at this meeting, he writes down at the dictation of the battalion's adjutant the ordre du jour, orders of the day, and anything that needs to be copied on paper and displayed publicly within the company, the adjutant will notice that by saying bon à tirer or bon pour tirer, basically good to print, good for print. He writes that down, and when he gets back to his company, he'll get the Fourier to write anything up on paper to be publicly displayed that needs to be publicly displayed. It could be maybe the orders of dress of the day. It could be who's on guard duty that day for the next 24 hours. It could be any particularly standing orders that the battalion commander decides to pass down. And likewise, once that order is drawn, is written up, he gets that checked and signed off by the company commander, as a way of saying not only has the company commander validated this, but the company commander is aware of this. So you can't say, I wasn't aware of this, you just did this behind my back. So everything is checked and counter-checked. Lastly, at 10:30 in the morning, he carries out the company roll call. So in the morning, you've got the corporals who woke the men up, they did the roll calls. And at 10:30, it's a sergeant major that does another roll call to make sure that everybody's there. And he does this in the presence of the officier de semaine, the weekly duty officer of the company. Once that's done, he then proceeds to read l'ordre du jour and announces the day's service. And every evening, in the presence of the officier de semaine, the daily duty officer, he witnesses, he doesn't conduct it, he witnesses, he has to be there, the roll call carried out by the sergeants of their subdivisions. So the first call in the morning, the corporals call their escouades and go and report their findings to the sergeant major. At 10:30, the company roll call is done by the sergeant major. And then in the evening, just before when the doors of the barracks are closed and everybody's supposed to be in bed by now, it's the sergeants that do the roll call in the presence of the Sgt Major. Each week, the Sergeant Major checks in the presence of the company commander the state of the beds and furniture of each barrack room. And if there's anything that's damaged or needs replacing, he gets that seen to. He checks the labels on each bed within the room just to make sure that the names are there. If there's anybody new, they have put their names down on that they are occupying that bed. He also makes sure that on the door of each barrack room, there's the name of every occupant that's supposed to be in this room. And also there's a list of items of the furniture and the state it's in. So it could be, for example, a list of 15 or so names of the different soldiers. And next to it, there'll be table, good condition, cutting board, bread cutting board, 2 benches, 5 beds, maybe some shelves over the beds for the shackles. So everything will be detailed there, and that's what he needs to see to every week to make sure that that's updated and kept updated in essence. The other thing he takes care of is le prêt. Le prêt is to borrow or to lend if you're talking finances, and we are talking finances here. So basically, it's a way of it's the money that gets issued to the different escouades for messing and all sorts of things like that. So before the money gets handed over, there has to be some form of writing. So in that case, what happens is the Sergeant Major writes up the feuille de prêt, the feuille paper or piece of paper of the loan, and he gets it signed off by the company captain before handing the money over to the officier de semaine at the appointed time. So it's like, in essence, making sure that money, when it comes out, the captain's aware of it. And then afterwards, when it's time to take the money out, he takes that paper signed by the captain at the appointed time to see the officier de semaine, who can then draw the money out. And then afterwards, it can be distributed. Any defective weapons, he writes a bon de réparation. Basically, a bon is a note, and réparation is just repair. And he gets that signed off also by the company's captain prior to handing the weapon over and the bon to the armorer. When the armorer is finished repairing the weapon and issues it again, he will hand over the weapon to the Sergeant Major with the bon. And then afterwards, that will be signed off as the weapon having been that the weapon has been issued. So basically, you have a paper trail showing the weapon going in, and you have the paper trail showing the weapon has been fixed and has come out and been reissued. He's also responsible for taking care of the ammunition given out to the guards. So, like I said, the guard changes every 24 hours. They get given powder and ball during their stint in the guardhouse. Once they've come back and they're dismissed, he takes that ammunition with them and stores it away. But before that, it's not him that collects it. It's the sous-officier de semaine that have to do this. This was in the previous presentations about corporals and sergeants. One of them is always the weekly duty corporal or sergeant, and they have to pick the ammunitions and make sure that the soldiers do not go back into barracks with live ammo inside the cartridges, or worse still, down the barrel. Once that's done, they give it to the Sergeant Major and he hands it back into stores. Again, mentioned the company's administrative manager is the Sergeant Major, not the officers. The officers are responsible to make sure that everything gets done correctly, but it is the Sergeant Major that actually does the writing and does the checking. We will not be going into detail tonight about these different books that he has to look after, but just to give a quick summary of what he has to look after, I've decided just to do a little slide with the different sort of books. They come in 4 categories: administration, so pure administrative books; discipline, in terms of punishment and all that; drill, who's competent at what; and then something that the French call police. So it's not police in the sense of what we understand in English. Police basically is the internal discipline. It's not the discipline per se of a man under arms or in the military sense. It's is this man basically doing what he's supposed to be doing, and he's doing it in the correct manner, in the correct spirit. And also police is basically your duties, your daily duties. So as you can see, you have the livre de signalement. That's just the description book. So every man, this is before photographs were a thing. So every man that comes in the livre de signalement, the Sgt Major writes down a description of the man. So he describes of course, his height, skin color, the shape of his nose, the shape of his mouth, the shape of his chin, the shape of his, what do you call it, forehead, the color of his hair, the color of his eyes, etc., etc. Does he have a very visible forehead? Does he have a receding hairline? It goes into quite a lot of details, and that's for each man within the company. That's whether he comes in or out, every man has to go through this. So it's like an ID card so that they can find him again. There's also the Contrôle d'annuel. So this is a book basically, every year there will be a control, there will be some sort of inspection to make sure that the books are in order, the men are in order, the equipment is good, the weapons is good, etc. It's basically the yearly review book. So this is what the Inspecting General wants to have a look at. The livre d'ordre is the order book. So every day, every new order gets given its own number and put into this. And there are several of these books in every regiment, since every day there's new orders. The inscription au service is when you actually joined the service. So basically it tells you where you are within the company, which private is more senior to another private, and that also will play in terms of their retirement, as I said. So hence, when you get busted down, when you're a corporal or sergeant, you get busted down to private, you can either get busted down as a private and you start again all over again. So those years of working hard have been for naught, or you get busted down, but they keep your service anyway, in which case you haven't lost everything. You've lost good part, but not everything. You've got the cahier d'appel, the roll call book, but that gets updated every day, 3 times a day. The livre de travailleur, the workers book. Basically, if you're in garrison, let's imagine that you're a soldier and you were a cobbler or maybe a carpenter before your military service, and you find out that in the town where you've got a garrison, there's a nice site, maybe there's a big house being built, or some sort of extension to the town hall, and they need laborers and they need carpenters for this, and you think, well, I'll do it, you know, if off duty, instead of doing nothing, I'll go down and get some money. I'll work and get some extra pay. If you can get your officer's permission to do this, you get noted down in this book as being a worker. Punishment book, le livre de punition, also called le petit livre rouge, the little red book, because it had a very distinctive red cover. Any punishment, no matter how minor to major, gets recorded in this book systematically. And last but not least, the livre d'instruction, the drill proficiency book. That's just to note what school each soldier is at. So whether have you passed soldier school? Have you passed platoon school? Are you now in battalion school? So it's just to know a bit where you are. And it also acts, for example, somebody who wants to go out and work, as mentioned, on a site outside. We can have a look in the livre d'instruction. We notice that he's actually a bad soldier. He hasn't even gone past lesson 3 of soldier school. So in which case it's no, sorry, in your spare time, you've got to catch up on your drill. So again, it's just another way of knowing what level your soldiers are up to. Other responsibilities of the Sergeant Major. So he is responsible in all sense of the word for the precision with which each man is described within the livre de signalement, the exactness of the pay given for the shoes, linen. So this is the prêt, in essence, this famous loan. The company gives money to each escouade to help with shoes, linen, and anything related to the hospital. So he's in charge of making sure he gets his numbers right before handing over the money. Likewise to workers, punished soldiers, soldiers that are sent outside of barracks. He also makes sure they get their part of the prêt. He is also in charge of any lanterns, shovels, candlesticks, tubs, etc., all forms of garrison material. And all items of camp and tools also, that's on campaign. He's also in charge of maintaining them and making sure they don't get lost or sold off or thrown into a ditch. He's also in charge of the cleanliness and maintenance of the blankets within the garrison. That's his role, to make sure everything's good and that you don't have moth-eaten blankets. And last but not least, is in charge of the conservation and maintenance of the uniforms, weaponry, and accoutrements. So you can see the Sergeant Major, being top dog, does actually have a lot of work and he's answerable for a lot of things, hence why he's top dog. One bit which could be interesting for reenactors generally, especially if you have new recruits coming in and you do have a Sergeant Major, it is the Sergeant Major that takes care of the incorporation of recruits. The way this happens is when the recruit arrives at his company, the Sergeant Major takes charge of him and he informs the recruit what escouade he is to be part of. The priority is always given to the weakest one, of course, and he tells the recruit the names of his corporal and his sergeant. After that, he takes the recruit to see the Sgt Major, so the surgeon. He gets a medical examination to make sure nothing's wrong with him and he's fit for duty. And once he's fit for duty, he gets his billet d'admission signed off by the surgeon. The billet d'admission is basically a little paper that says he's in. He's now officially part of the company, so that has to be signed off by the Sgt Major. So the Sergeant Major will sign it first, and if everything goes well, the surgeon signs it. After that, he notes the recruit's name in the company's books and supplies him with the kit with the help of the Fourier. Once the new recruit has got his kit and once he's updated all the company books to include him in there, including the livre de signalement, he's got to make sure he stands in front of them so that he makes his note of how this guy looks like. He gets the recruit dressed and equipped. Once that's done, he takes him off to meet his company officers. So he meets his sous-lieutenant, he meets his lieutenant, and he meets his capitaine at that point. Once that meeting's over, the Sergeant Major hands him over to the sergeant of the escouade that will be joining. And then from then on, the sergeant takes care of him, taking him to the corporal, and the corporal does the rest of the integration. When there are reviews, when the company is to be reviewed, it is the Sergeant Major that prepares the company for review, not the officers. There are two types of reviews. There's the revue d'inspection. So that's just an inspecting review. It can be called at any time, the captain or any other officer within the battalion or the division or the brigade or even the regiment deems to want to see it. When that happens, when he knows that there's a revue d'inspection, he organizes the company en A, that's on one rank. So everybody is on a single rank. The officers and the NCOs on the right of that line, according to the rank, the most senior on the right. So it would be the captain, then it would be the lieutenant, then there would be the sous-lieutenant. Then after there would be the Sergeant Major's place. And then afterwards there would be the Fourier, and then there would be the sergeants in descending order of seniority, and then there would be the corporals. And then afterwards there would be the privates. And the privates are not laid out in height order, or they're not laid out in escouade. They're laid out according to their numéro de contrôle, their control numbers, in essence their ID numbers. Again, if you are the most senior private of that company, you should be holding the right of the private's line. In the further left you go to the least senior person, that's where you should be. So it doesn't follow any height. It's purely your ID number and where you are, where your ID number is within the company. When the inspector arrives, it's the sergeant major that hands over the company feuille. So basically, he's prepared a paper where every man in the company has been outlined. And all the inspector has to do is start on the right of the line with the captain. You should be Capitaine Dufour. Yes, okay. And then you go down like that all the way through the line. So in theory, if the sergeant major's done the job right, every time that inspector is going to come in front before a man, it will be the next man down from the man he's just seen on that list. So make sure that the privates don't start playing about and change position, because that will reflect quite badly on you. By the way, it's not the sergeant major that does this list, it's the Caporal Fourier that has to write it up and get it signed off by the company captain. It's just the sergeant major who hands it over to the inspector. So that's a inspection review, revue d'inspection. The revue générale, much more formal, probably once a year, or maybe before going out into campaign, or maybe going out after the winter break to the forthcoming campaign. So it's a bigger, more serious inspection. For that, the sergeant major organizes the company into 3 open ranks, not closed ranks. That's for the corporals and the sergeants and the privates. On the right of that block are the officers, and on the left of that block are the enfants de troupe. Again, this is a review before you're going on campaign. So you're about to leave the depot. So when you leave the depot, you've got the enfants de troupe there. So they get reviewed as well at the same time. And during that inspection, the sergeant major carries out the appel. So he does the roll call before the inspection starts. Little thing that was quite interesting in the regulations, when the sergeant major calls your name, if you're just a soldier or an NCO, you cry présent, present. But if you're a drummer, you don't say anything, you just strike your drum once. The sergeant major, as I mentioned earlier, keeps kit of any man that's not in the company. So that's his equipment, his accoutrements, his backpack and his weapons. He keeps that within his lodgings. That could be soldiers that are in the hospital on sick leave. It could be soldiers that are punished, so they're in the guard room or in prison. And it could also be soldiers that have been given leave of absence and they're maybe going home for a holiday in essence, or going back to sort some family affairs. So while they're away, he takes care of all that equipment. Before that happens, before the guy goes out to where he needs to go, the sergeant, in the example I've given here, it's a man that's going to hospital. It'll be slightly different paperwork depending on whether it's a congé, a holiday leave, or whether it's the prison. But for this example, I've decided to make it a man that's going into hospital because he's just too sick for duty. So the first thing he does is he gets a billet d'hôpital. That's the paperwork to get the man into the hospital. He gets that drawn up. He gets it signed off by his captain. And he gets it signed off prior to that by the surgeon. So in the morning when the surgeon went past the guardhouse, remember, he picked up the little note saying that, for example, Maurice of 2nd Escouade is feeling a bit low, sick. The surgeon checks him out. Yes, he is sick. This man actually needs to go to the hospital. Get me a billet d'hôpital drawn up. He signs it off. The surgeon signs it off, and then afterwards he takes it up to the captain to get it signed off. Once that's done, he comes in with the soldier into the captain's office with the backpack of the soldier, and he places inside the backpack at the bottom of it a list of everything that's within that backpack. Okay, so if the soldier doesn't know how to read, the sergeant major will read everything that's on that list. The soldier confirms that, yes, that's everything that's in my pack. You're not missing anything out, or you haven't, that was 5 francs and not 3 francs like you said in the list. Once that's done, he signs it off, and it's countersigned not by the soldier, but it's countersigned by either the soldier's corporal or sergeant, who's also present during all of this. That's put inside. The bag is then shut. And then a piece of paper bearing the captive's scene is sewn on the pallet. So it's like a seal. This thing is not you don't break it. It's a way of proving that no one's been in the pack while the guy's been out. And once that's done, the sergeant major hands over the sick man and the billet to an NCO to take him to the hospital. And then he takes the pack and the equipment, and he gets the equipment of the soldier. The pack he takes, the rest of the equipment, he gets other people to bring it up to his lodgings. And it stays there until such time as the man comes back from hospital. If there are any deserters, okay, so you can't get a bon de whatever for a deserter. But if the deserter, if there is a deserter, the equipment belongs to the state, it goes back to the company, but everything that's inside the bag, that's a personal belonging, it's the sergeant major that sells it off in the presence of the captain. He can organize it as an auction, for example. Should the deserters return, though, then they have to be reimbursed for any kit that has been sold. That's the way it works. En route, so this is what he does in his garrison or in camp. Once the regiment needs to move out to wherever, the sergeant major marches with his company, and in each day of march, he writes up and hands over état de situation. And he gives that to his company captain. État de situation, the state of the situation, literally the general state of affairs every day. How are the troops? What are their morale like? How many are there? How many sick men do we have now? How many still under arms, etc. So every day during the march, this is during a march, so he does this on campaign. He also submits this sort of paperwork to his captain, and he carries out all the different roll calls. Not the ones we saw in the garrison, these are brand new ones that he has to do. So the first roll call is conducted before the company within the battalion marches off. The second is conducted 200 paces after moving off. And at every halt thereafter, a roll call is also called out. Prior to that roll call, he has to place the company in line of battle. As a line of battle, open arms and stacked arms. Then he does the roll call, and then afterwards everybody can go off for that little break. Once the break is over, at the moment of marching again, he gets the men to carry l'arme au bras, close ranks, and he doesn't do a roll call then, he just counts the files. So before he breaks the company for that break, he counts the number of files. When the company forms up again, ready to march, he just counts once more the files, and if they are the exact same files, all is good, off we go, we march off again. And again, 200 meters, 200 paces afterwards, he will do a roll call to make sure that there's nobody that disappeared at some point during that halt. And on the march, the sergeant major, contrary to the sergeant and the corporal, he has the right to sleep alone, whereas the sergeants sleep with the men on the march, and they sleep separately from the main garrison. So that's the sergeant major done. Let's have a quick look at the Fourier. So the Caporal Fourier is the company's secretary. The administrative manager is the Sgt Major, but the secretary, the guy who actually does a lot of the pen work, is the Caporal Fourier. So all new written orders are given to him. Why do we give it to him? Because he can't sign off on anything. He then makes sure that the relevant people sign off on that paperwork. So any new orders that come from brigade, be it we've got a review today at such and such a time, we have today's order of dress, we'll be wearing black gaiters, not greys. Gets that in, he brings it to the relevant people, they get it signed off, and then after he either publishes it or he puts it in the order book, or both for some cases. Again, anything that the sergeant major wants to delegate to him, he can, and he has to do it. And the Fourier is in charge, as well as being in charge of these extra pieces of work that the sergeant major gives him. He's solely responsible for the livre de détail, the detail book. That's basically the livre where any distribution that's been made gets noted down. It's the detail of, it could be maybe distribution of money in some cases, but normally it's distribution of rations, distribution maybe of equipment. It depends. He also keeps two other books, a cahier de petite monture and the cahier de toutes les fournitures de liés autres. So the first one, petite monture, small items. It's a book of small items. Any small items he distributes, it goes down in there. A cahier de toutes les fournitures de lit, that's anything, that's all supplies related to bed. So it could be linen, straw mattresses, maybe pillows, etc. That sort of thing. So again, anything that he distributes out for that attention, for beds, he has a special book to make sure that he notes down these distributions. And the first day of every month, the company commander, so the captain, checks these books to make sure that they are being properly maintained. You are aware, I take it, that every soldier in the French army has a livret militaire. He has a little booklet that he carries around with him. This is a service booklet detailing his entire career. The only person in the company that can write in that book is the Caporal Fourier. Okay, so anything that needs to be written in there, that includes pay, and there's a lot of pages for pay actually. That's a Sergeant Major. That's the Caporal Fourier that does it. But he doesn't do it just between him and the soldier. He has to have either the corporal or the sergeant of the soldier present before doing the inscription. That's what you can actually see going on here. So in the images here, the Fourier is filling out his soldier's paybook. The soldier is waiting patiently, and off camera on the right is actually the sergeant of that corporal's escort, keeping an eye out, making sure that the Fourier writes everything correctly. Of course, apart from doing all this paperwork, the Fourier also has to do a lot of distributions. Any distribution that he does, regardless of what it is, he cannot do it by himself. He needs to be in presence of the officier de semaine, the weekly duty officer. However, any errors made during said distribution, that's the Fourier's fault and he has to pay for it. There are, last time I checked in the regulation, there were over 22 different types of distribution that the Caporal Fourier does. I've only included the two that would be most common or maybe the most likely to do at a reenactment. If you want the 20 others, I will be more than happy to share that information after the conference. So let's just look at these two. So you have the famous le prêt, the loan, the money that the escouades need in order to be able to buy food or buy linen or get linen washed in any case. That's the Fourier who distributes this to the chef d'escouade. So that's the corporals in charge of each escouade. He writes down the total amount that was distributed, how he distributed it within that livre de détail, that little detail book that he writes down all his distributions, and he gets that signed off by the officier de semaine who's watched this. The officier de semaine has to be present for money distribution. So once it's all done, he shows what he's written in his book. If the officier de semaine is happy with that, the officier puts his signature down, job done, let's move on. The other one I've included is le pain, the bread distribution. So what happens is the Fourier leads the men de corvée. Les hommes de corvée, these are the corvée men, so basically the men who are roped into doing this chore, and they're wearing gilets or the sabre, this sort of smock, that's the word I was looking for, smock, over their uniform, men bonnet de police. They take their sac de distribution, these very big linen bags, almost like a sleeping bag. These are distribution bags for the rations. He takes them down to the appointed place of distribution for the appointed time. He writes down what he distributes and how he distributed it within, of course, the livre de détail, the little detail book, and of course he gets it signed off by the officier de semaine, who is there watching over him, watching this entire distribution. So you're getting the gist that even when he distributes things, there has to be the duty officer, either the duty officer of the week or the captain. It depends what sort of thing he's handing out. But in essence, he always needs somebody there afterwards to sign off to make sure he's covered. The other responsibilities of the Caporal Fourier, so marking the clothing, accoutrements, and weapons of the soldiers, that's the Fourier's responsibility. So the numbers he has to put in each of these items are the regimental number, the soldier's ID number, and the company number. He also takes care of all the different numbers that the soldiers get attributed. You have inscription matricule, that's your proper ID number per se. Contrôle annuel, that's your control number, where you stand in this famous review, where you are within the company, you know, if you're the most senior soldier or the less senior soldier. He also gives a number on, he gives the soldier a number that will be put on his equipment, that will be all unique to that soldier, or his uniform. Rang de taille, he gives them a number also in accordance to the height. So if somebody wants to do an inspection and they want everybody to see height orders, he just needs to call out number such and such on the right, number such and such next down, and the rest of it. Also the number of the soldier within this squad, and there's 3 other numbers also, which are not that interesting, but basically a soldier can have up to 6 different numbers depending on what he's supposed to do, as well as his general ID number, his inscription matricule. And that's the Fourier that is in charge of attributing that number to the soldier when he comes into the company for the first time. The Fourier is also responsible for preparing the rapport, this famous 24-hour report, the last 24 hours report. The Sergeant Major hands it over, but it's the Fourier that has to write it up. And the Fourier has to hand it over to the Sergeant Major at before 7 a.m. each morning. So it's a nice early start for the Fourier. The Fourier warns the Caporal de Semaine, so the weekly duty corporal of the company, when the general chores are to be carried out, and he warns the Caporal d'Escouade, the corporals in charge of squads, when rations distribution take place. Why? Because he needs them to delegate or choose the corvée men to send to him for those distributions. He fills out the billet d'hôpital, he fills out the billet de congé, he's in charge of filling out all sorts of different little paperwork for soldiers that are either going on leave or going into hospital. He gets that signed off also by the Sgt Major if it's a billet d'hôpital, or by the company captain if it's a leave. He draws that famous list up. He's the one who writes the list of all the items within the backpack of the soldier, and then he hands that over along with the billet d'hôpital in our example to the Sergeant Major. So again, the Sergeant Major has done nothing. He's just warned that this soldier is going, prepare the paperwork, and then afterwards when the paperwork's done, he takes it over from there. Just a side note, any soldier that is given leave, the Caporal Fourier draws up a list of all his kit and belongings, and he hands everything over to the Sergeant Major for safekeeping. On the march, the Fourier actually, he's the one that collects the billets de logement, so the billets. The English word for billeting, as in sleeping in somebody else's house on the march, probably comes, I suspect, from the French word billet, a note, a piece of paper, a ticket, if you will. Lodging tickets, billeting. So the Fouriers go get out in front to the town or village where the battalion, or where, anyway, in any case, his company will be staying, and he writes out all these different billets on the billet de logement once he's received them from the civilian authorities. Before he does that, though, the first thing he does is to check his company officers' lodgings first to make sure they're okay. If they are acceptable, at that point he sits down or he takes all the billets and writes down the names of all the soldiers for the different billets. So, for example, if his company, let's say, will be staying in half a dozen houses, let's say, in this town, he'll have a billet de logement with the address of each of the houses, and he writes down the names of the soldiers that will be, for example, in house on Rue de la Paix, in the house on Rue des Acadias. He writes the name of those soldiers, and he'll be distributing these tickets out later on when his company gets there. One thing he doesn't need to make sure, though, is that the Sergeant Major is always lodged with the tambour. The tambour is the only way that you can call the soldiers to gather quickly if you need to. So since the Sergeant Major is the boss and is running the daily duties of the companies, he needs to have the drummer at hand if necessary to gather soldiers or corporals or sergeants quickly to him. Once that administration work is done, the Fourier waits for his battalion. The Fouriers wait for their battalion to arrive. Once the battalion arrives, each Fourier, upon the battalion having broken ranks, will go and rejoin his company. He then guides the company to the lodgings of the captain so that they all see where the captain is lodging, and it is there that he proceeds to distribute the billets to all the men, and from then on the men go off and find their billets. If necessary, the Fourier can act as a guide and take them to the billet if it's going to be a bit complicated. Each day, the État Général is written up by the Fourier for the company commander and the sergeant major. So he hands it over to the sergeant major, who verifies it and then gets it checked off by the company commander. And then once he's done that, that's for the entire company. He does another État Général before each section. So for section 1 and section 2, and that gets given to the lieutenant and the sous-lieutenant. In order to do this, he keeps a cahier de logement. So within this cahier de logement, lodgings book, if you will, he notes where he's put everybody. And if there are any changes, if the billet was not acceptable and they've been given a new one, or maybe Maurice is sick again, so you have to take him out and put him in hospital. He has to make sure that gets noted down so that we know where everybody in the company is staying, and if they're all there, or if they're sick, or if they're out, or whatever, that gets noted down. That's the Fourier's job, to keep that up to date on a daily basis. Last but not least, on the march, of course, he does all the distributions, all the ration distributions. The Fourier does it like he did in garrison. He needs to have the officier de semaine present. He needs to note down the livre de détail, but this takes place at the in front of the company commander's lodgings, and it's done at the beating of La Breloque, just like in garrison. We're coming to the last part of our presentation today. So, having seen all the duties, you can imagine that an incompetent sergeant major or an incompetent Caporal Fourier is actually going to be a huge pain to the smooth running of the company. So if you do have an incompetent one, it is best you get rid of him. How do you get rid of him? It's exactly the same almost as getting rid of a sergeant or getting rid of a corporal. You have minor offenses being breaches of dress, be it his personal dress or the dress of his subordinates, or you have serious breaches of discipline or service. And then that's prison or the guardhouse. You have different orders of dress, exactly the same as the sergeants and the corporals, depending on whether you're in prison or whether you're just consigned to quarters. You don't get put in a cell, just like the sergeants and the corporals, except if you've committed an offense which is so heinous that you're going to get dragged in front of the military tribunal. And if that is the case, you do get put in a cell and you are put on for bread and water, and your extra pay, regardless, be it whether you are consigned to quarters or whether you're in a cell, your extra pay gets distributed out to company funds. Okay. Likewise, again, everything as harmless or as serious as it appears gets noted down in the little red punishment book. So, who has the power to do what? Okay, it's not all officers are equal in terms of what they can do in terms of punishing NCOs, and the sergeant major and the Fourier is no different. So, to make it clear, lieutenants, les sous-lieutenants, they can only consign or put a sergeant major or a Caporal Fourier in a holding cell. Okay, that's the guardhouse. That's not a proper prison cell. Captains, they can only suspend their own sergeant major or their own Caporal Fourier from their duties or put them in prison. They cannot do it to another company's men. The colonel of the regiment or any senior regimental officers, they have the right to strip ranks from sergeant majors and Fouriers, not captains and not lieutenants or sous-lieutenants. And if a lieutenant should be in charge of a company because there's no captain, we're waiting for a new captain, the last one's dead or whatever, if the lieutenant is exercising company commander status, he has the same power as he would as a lieutenant, and he also has, in that case, the power to put his sergeant major or his Caporal Fourier in prison. So he basically acquires the power of the captain when he's commanding the company. So that's how it works. As you can see, the only people that can really bother you if you're a sergeant major or a Caporal Fourier, the captain can put you in prison, sure, but he can't strip you from your rank and from your pay, from your pay permanently. I mean, while you're in prison, yes, sure, he can take away your extra pay. But the colonel, the major, the chef de bataillon, the battalion commander, they can actually take your stripes away. So that's when things start to get serious, when it goes all the way up there. So how does it work? two things can happen to them. They can either be temporarily suspended or they can be cassé. Cassé is the French verb to break, and this is basically means to be stripped of rank. Okay, so a sergeant major can get back squadded, downgraded to sergeant, and whichever sergeant he replaces, because you have 4 sergeants in the company, if you break your sergeant major, he has to take one of these sergeant majors' places, and whoever's place he takes, that guy automatically becomes your new sergeant major. Okay. It is possible also for a sergeant major to be back squadded to corporal or even to private if necessary. It's not what usually happens, but it can. There is that possibility. Likewise, if the sergeant gets back squadded to corporal, the corporal will take over the sergeant's position, the subdivision sergeant, and the sergeant of that subdivision becomes the sergeant major. It's not the corporal who becomes the sergeant major in this case. If you get back squadded to private, again, the next thing, that's already bad, but the next thing, which will be the icing on the cake, is whether you get back squadded with loss of service or without loss of service. So if you get back squadded without loss of service, okay, you've lost that sergeant major's extra pay, but you're still probably one of the most senior privates of that company. So all your work that you've done previously has not gone to waste. We do recognize the fact that you've done maybe 10 years service up till then. If you get back squadded and they take away your service, in essence, you've just rejoined the army for the first time and you have to start your whole work again. That's probably the ultimate punishment you can give to sergeant major or corporals, sergeants or corporals. But I suppose it's less of a burden for corporal and less of a burden for the sergeant, simply because it's not as high up. I mean, sergeant major, you're the top of the ladder. You're the boss of the company, and now not only are you going to become just a private, but they're going to take all your service, all the hours and years you've put in. That's pretty devastating. So that's the cassé. Otherwise, they can just suspend you temporarily. If they suspend you temporarily, you continue to wear your rank insignia, nothing changes. But what happens is you will carry out the duties of the sergeant that's replacing you. So, but your extra pay, your extra sergeant major pay, that goes into company funds. You only get paid up to the level of sergeant because you're only doing the job of a sergeant, and that extra bit that you get, 50% of that goes to the sergeant that's replacing you temporarily, and the other 50% goes to the company kitty. Same thing with Caporal Fourier, so they can be stripped of rank, cassé, or they can be temporarily suspended. If you decide to back squad a Caporal Fourier, you downgrade them to corporal, and the corporal he replaces automatically becomes the new Caporal Fourier for the company. And again, you can also back squad them to private, either keeping their service history or with loss of all their service history. For suspension, it's exactly the same thing. The Caporal Fourier, the caporal that replaces the Caporal Fourier, he gets 50% of the Caporal Fourier's extra pay, and the other 50% goes into company funds until the end of suspension. Suspensions are pronounced at this one's in French, don't worry about it, but basically suspension is pronounced at the cercle d'ordre, so the meeting, the regimental meeting, when the regimental officers come together with the battalion commanders eventually, and they pronounce this suspension, and they will always make sure that they tell the length of the punish the suspension and for what motive he's suspended. If you're going to strip him of rank, in that case, that's pronounced before the entire company assembled. At that point, once the company is assembled, the sergeant major or the Caporal Fourier will be marched out before his peers, and an officer, one of the company officers, will take sword in hand and will say in a very loud voice, I've got the text in French before you, de par le roi, by the king's order, Remember, the regulations during the Napoleonic Wars were, in essence, the regulations of the old Royal Army. So by the King's will, NCOs, corporals, and soldiers, you will no longer recognize such and such a person as Sergeant Major or Caporal Fourier, depending on what his rank is. For by his misconduct, he has merited to be downgraded to such and such a rank, whatever back squad you've decided, having committed such and such a fault. At that point, the officer strips the rank insignia off the man, and the man goes into whatever rank. So if he's become a private, he goes into the ranks, and if he becomes a sergeant, he takes the new place, the place of the old sergeant, new Sgt Major, for example, and then you proceed with the ceremony inducting your new Sergeant Major. Again, I cannot stress this enough. Any punishment, no matter how minor to how major, gets systematically noted in the little red punishment book. Okay, it's the same thing for a Caporal Fourier. Okay, so I'll just leave that with you. So to sum up this evening, ladies and gentlemen, the Sergeant Major and the Caporal Fourier are the heart. They are the heart of the infantry company. It is not the officer. It is these two men that make sure that the company functions. On their shoulders depends all the work and service of a company, and they have to operate together, much like a quarterback and a center operates in a US football team. I had to change that because I doubt my rugby phrase that I was using would have made a lot of sense to most of you. So I hope I picked the two most important positions of a US football team, but I'm sure you'll let me know. So these men, gentlemen, are not extras. These are the heart of a company, and these are the men that actually run the company on behalf of the officers.
Okay, thank you, Marc.
Thank you very much.
I see that there was a question from Sonia, who's asking, who's in charge of wagons and/or horses?
Is that the regimental ones?
Yeah.
Or is that the private ones?
No, I would assume the regimental ones.
The regimental ones, right? The only thing, I haven't actually looked into this because I think that's a lot higher up. I think that's an officer within the battalion's administration that takes care of that. So I would say definitely not the Sergeant Major and definitely not the Caporal Fourier. It would be a probably battalion level officer, but I can't tell you exactly who. I didn't study that particular question.
We're open for other questions. If you want to unmute your mics, now is your time.
Looking after wagons, by the way, at the top level is a Wegmaster.
The Wegmaster, yeah, that's an officer.
That's an officer, and he's responsible for wagons.
Any other questions out there? I noticed that Matthew was funny. You figured out what consigne means, which is nice.
I have a question. What are the 20 other things the Corporal Fourier was responsible for? You can email them.
I will email them with the detail if you want. But just for example, there's the distribution of equipment. There's the distribution of accoutrements. There's the distribution of uniforms. There's the distribution of different tools and equipment when you're on campaign. That gets distributed by him as well. I'm totally honest with it. I only picked the two which seem to me the most interesting from a recreation point of view, simply because distributing bread or rations tends to happen or is easy to reenact as opposed to handing out tents, picks, shovels is a lot rarer in reenactment circles. But I can definitely give you the list if you want, Peter.
Yeah. Thank you.
No problem. Anything else? You're very welcome, Evan, if I've pronounced that correctly.
Well, if there are
Thank
no
you,
other
Peter.
questions, I can stop the recording.
Yep.
People are free to chat about this topic or other ones for a little while. But I think I'll just thank you, Mark, for tremendous detail that we get from this, that hopefully we can apply to reenactments and have some reason to do things in camp when people are wandering by and, you know, tourists or whatever, and saying, well, what is it you guys do during the day if you're not fighting on the battlefield? And obviously there are lots of things we could do, whether it's going rounds, doing roll calls, and so on. Distribution of bread, and actually, rather than just handing it out, have the right person with the paperwork, passing back and forth, people signing off. Makes for an interesting thing.
It would also be good to move it up the line as well. So if this is actually being done at company level, it'd be good to see what happens at battalion, brigade, etc.
At the last Fontainebleau event, we did exactly that.
Yep.
I was playing the role of adjutant sous-officier of a battalion, and we had the battalion commander and an adjutant major. We had 6 companies in the battalion. Yep. We reproduced not all the livrets that you've seen there, because, to be honest, the livre, you know, the ID book, we're not going to use that over a weekend. Yep. But the roll call book we reproduced, the punishment book we reproduced, the rank, the size of the men, the seniority of the men. We prepared all the administration books for all the companies and handed it over to all the companies on the night. We'd prepped them a lot earlier on, including the guys who were going to do Sergeant Major. And just getting the information to arrive on time, hell of a challenge. Exactly. And half the time, the information that was arriving, the paperwork that was arriving, was not being signed by anybody. So that was going back and into the circuit. I felt like an admin manager going crazy again. But it does work. The guys, the groups had never done this before. But I cannot say that they drank their feet or they resisted. And yes, it was very useful for us, because with the information we were getting back, we knew exactly how to organize the reviews for the Emperor. So it was quite...
Well, just thinking forward, could we do it at the large events next year?
Do
you think it's workable?
Anything is workable if the people on the ground are willing to do it.
Yeah, true. Agreed.
A couple of the sergeant majors that were at Fontainebleau said they really... So when I say sergeant major, I think only 2 of them were ranked sergeant majors. Yep. The others were sergeants doing the role, because that's something else. I insist you don't have to have the stripes. You just accept to do the role, and we'll give you the extra pay. And they've actually said it was really interesting. Totally different. First time I've done this, but I wouldn't want to do it every reenactment event.
Yeah.
Which I could understand, people not wanting to do paperwork all the time, because, to be honest, they did spend all morning and most of the afternoon filling in those books. Even though they were quite little, it's still asked a certain amount of investment. We talked. The guys at Fontainebleau, we talked about, are we going to reproduce this at Waterloo, for example?
Yep.
We'll be there as a battalion, so shall we do this as well? And the idea that came back is the only thing that's interesting on a battle reenactment in terms of admin is simply the roll call, to know how many men you have, so that you can equalize companies. The rest of it would depend, but you're not going to do reviews. You're definitely not going to do a review at a battle reenactment, because you've got a battle to fight. So I don't see where you're going to put a big grande revue générale in there. So in
Yeah,
that
yeah,
case,
yeah.
you don't need to do an ID, you don't need to do the ID code. You
Yeah.
don't need to do the contrôle de rang de taille. So that takes that out. The only thing that's left really is the roll call, just to make sure the numbers. So I would say, yes, there is a space for it, definitely, but it needs to be flexible. If it's a battle reenactment, maybe just the roll call part of it is important.
And the other, sorry.
No, and if it's a garrison or a more ceremonious, let's say, event, then yeah, you can definitely do that because there's more scope to use the information to good effect.
So
Yeah, and the other point you made there is you have to pre-plan it well in advance. So you can't just say on the Friday or the Saturday we're going to do this because it's too late.
A lot of prep work. I'm sure.
Yeah,
It's
exactly.
a lot of prep work because people don't do it and they're not used to it.
Exactly.
The more we do it, the more it
Easier
becomes a regular feature, the less prepping you'll need because people will be used to doing that sort of thing. But this is a medium to long term goal.
So I have a quick question, having unfortunately missed the Fontainebleau. For all the paperwork that was done, did people use quill and ink, or did we sort of fake it by just using a ballpoint pen?
I did not cheat. I did not cheat. The battalion level did not cheat. And when I went out there and had a look around, nobody was cheating. And the paperwork coming back, nothing was in ballpoint pen ink. Everything was in quills.
Really?
Yes. Some of them were using real plumes. Some of them were using, the metal tip that you put on the end that makes it easier. I ended up using that in the end because I was getting ink all over the place, but nobody used ballpoint pens. I can guarantee that they did do the job correctly. But again, that's the main organizer had warned people would be doing it November last year, and we've been warning people and prepping people and getting ready little by little all the way through. So a good 9-10 month prepping, but it can be done, and it is nice when it comes together. Within our own group and within the Living History Charter, we've been doing the paperwork side of it at Forlì-Cluse Garrison, for example, for a number of years. So it was quite easy to be able to teach, having myself gone through the Sgt Major role. I knew exactly how to teach it to somebody else. If you had asked me before I did a couple of Forlì-Cluse garrisons to do the teaching, I would have been useless. It's something that you have to do fairly regularly, or at least you have to remember the details for it to sink in. And as said, I don't think every NCO in reenactment will want necessarily to do paperwork and be reminded of their work when they're on our reenactments.
Okay.
So you need volunteers.
A parallel question. For the various books and forms that have to be filled out, do you have like a pre-printed blank? It would be interesting for those who are interested to send you an email to get, a Word copy or whatever of the blanks that we could then try and complete in practice before we're faced with let's say a Waterloo, where we suddenly go, well, okay, we talked about this last year, here you go. And then suddenly, got to make sure I can read everything on there and what goes into which square.
Yeah, we definitely have blank templates. I'm more than willing to help with photos, or even ask the guys to provide the PDF templates. Matt Groves on the chat actually said, could you write it in pencil to save time? You could for a reenactment. Why not? Because it's only a weekend thing. I think if you were writing things in pencil 200 years ago in the admin book, you would probably get strung up because this thing tends to disappear quite easily. But in terms of the actual paperwork, if you want a copy, Vic, I can give you a copy.
I would love that. And then anyone in Brigade Napoleon who wants to try some or all of these kind of things could contact me, and I could send them on you know, the various different forms.
I mean, to be frank, to be absolutely frank, the battalion at Fontainebleau were all Belgian or French-speaking Belgians or Frenchmen. Therefore, it was easy to read the text. I would be very interested for Waterloo next year in the composite battalion, for example. I know there'll be our brethren from the United Kingdom and from Germany who do not necessarily read French, how well they'd get on with this. Would it need to be translated?
Yeah.
But it would be a useful exercise.
Yeah.
Oh, it would be a lovely exercise. It would just take them twice as long to fill it in.
Yeah, true. But we could always give them help.
Yeah, but
Of
given
course,
enough
yeah,
time, I could translate, you know, even if I get on a PDF, I can edit PDFs and translate them into Czech for the Czechs and, you know, Russian for the Russians and whatever.
But
So at least
the problem you'll have
forms-
there, is that when the paperwork comes back and you've got, for example, the little me doing adjutant sous officier waiting for this paperwork to come back in. Oh, first company, it's in French. I can read that.
No. You
Then,
misunderstand.
oh my God, it's in Czech.
No. I don't mean, but I mean for somebody who, let's say, does not read French at all. So there are things written there and there's a blank. If they have a version that's in Czech,
Yeah.
where they can go and say, okay, well, the first thing says, what is the date? Okay.
Yeah.
So in the same place, just put in the date on the French version. Don't write it in Czech. You have to be able to write it in French, but at least for the Americans or the Brits or the Russians, the third square down is the name of the person. The fourth square down is his age. The fifth square down is what town he comes from. Otherwise, you're looking at something and saying, well, it's written stuff and they're blanks, but I don't know what to put there.
But I think that's a good idea. In essence, a guide to how to fill in your paperwork.
So assuming that COVID continues, I may have enough time to try and make translations like that. And, you know, make that as, let's say, in some other color, so you know that's not the official one. Here is the French version, but this is one translated, so you know what to put where.
But as says, I'll have a word with Alexander just to see if it's his creation. So it would just be honest, just to ask him, is it okay if I pass it on to the North Americans and the Brits if they're interested?
Yeah, that'd be good. And Mark, maybe we could take this offline with Frankie if we think it's got legs, so he can actually think about it.
That's sticking my head out of the precipice. I don't mind sticking my head out of the precipice, but it needs to be for a good reason. If Frankie needs my input, he knows where to find me. Put it that way.
Yeah, no, that's a fair comment. That's a fair comment.
But it's something that can definitely be used. But again, it's you need the organizer on board, and two, you need the guys on board, and three, you need to prep it. It's not something that can be done like that.
No, completely agree.
Is the recording off? Should we put the recording off now, Vic?
I'm turning it off now. I formally thank you, Mark, for a wonderful presentation. And the recording is over now.